In his dissent to the 1927 case of Olmsted versus United States, US Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis pledged that phone conversations are subjected to privacy protections under the Fourth Amendment, which prohibits unreasonable searches and seizures of people's houses, papers, and effects. So here I need to decide the correct verb. Now, this was a statement that was made by the judge. So in the context of that, the best answer would be assert. To assert is to make an assertion, to make a statement. So the justice said that phone conversations are subject to privacy protections under the Fourth Amendment. So I like B. To pledge is to make a promise, right? For example, I pledge to safeguard my country in a time of crisis. So that doesn't make sense in the context of the justice making a statement. To demand is to ask someone of something. So again, that doesn't make sense. And to divulge is to reveal something, right? For example, he divulged the details of the plan. So that also doesn't fit the context. Now here, again, it's idiomatic. I need to decide the correct word. Phone conversations are subject to, right? Which is to say they are opened to, or that they fall under the same privacy protections that the Fourth Amendment speaks of, right? So to be subject to something is to fall under the purview of something, right? That's what we are saying here. Subjected to would mean to be made to undergo something. For example, the criminal was subjected to torture, right? Which is to say that the criminal was made to undergo torture. So that is different from subject to, right? Subject to is used in the case of rules and provisions, while subjected is when somebody undergoes something. So it's not A. Subject of is matter of, right? For example, this is a subject of environmental protection, which is to say that this is something that environmental activists should look into. So that's not what we are saying. We are not saying that phone conversations are subjects of privacy protections. We are saying that they are subject to, they fall under the purview of privacy protections. And subjection is the abstract form of the other meaning of subject, which is to say that to be the subject of another country or another ruler, right? So that would mean that you are under the thumb of that ruler. So that doesn't fit the context of privacy protections. So D. Brandeis' argument is a key precedent for modern legal interpretations of the Fourth Amendment. Now here I have options that say lawyer type thinking these days on, the things legal bigwigs say today about, and what law pundits have reckoned lately regarding. So none of these are as concise or as formal as option A, right? I basically need to say that modern legal interpretations of privacy, they take inspiration from what Brandeis said. So lawyer type thinking or legal bigwigs saying something or law pundits reckoning lately, none of this captures this formally or concisely, so A. Indeed, the influence of his argument has been so widespread that many in the US today assume that the Fourth Amendment plainly guarantees a right to privacy of communication. According to law professor Anuj Desai, the guarantee can principally be ascribed not to the Constitution, but rather to the early history of the US Postal Service and the judicial reverberations of that history through time. However, the US Constitution makes no explicit reference to such privacy. To make this paragraph most logical, sentence 5 should be placed where? So this is sentence 5. However, the US Constitution makes no explicit reference to such privacy. And if you think about it, here we are saying that the influence of Brandeis's argument is so widespread that many in the US assume that the Fourth Amendment plainly guarantees a right to the privacy of communication. So here I'm talking about how many people assume that the Constitution has a basis for a right to the privacy of communication. But then I'm explaining what Professor Anuj Desai says, that this guarantee is not ascribable to the Constitution, but to the history of the US Postal Service. So this statement, right, which kind of provides the transition between what many in the US believe, and this detailing of the issue by Anush Desai, that should come between sentences 3 and 4, right? Because here I'm saying most people think the Constitution has such a guarantee. And then I'm saying the US Constitution makes no explicit reference to such privacy. And then I'm explaining where this reference comes from. So sentence 5 should come after sentence 3. As tensions between loyalists and revolutionaries escalated during the 1770s, the British-controlled colonial postal service became an increasing source of concern. Even though the American Secretary, Lord Dartmouth, wanted to avoid going to war. In response to this anxiety, the Second Continental Congress established an independent mail service in 1775 that had provided safeguards for confidentiality, such as a provision that mail for delivery be under lock and key. Which choice most effectively develops the information earlier in the sentence and sets up the information in the sentence that follows? So here we are talking about tensions between loyalists and revolutionaries. And because of those tensions, there wasn't enough faith in the British-controlled postal service. It became a source of concern. And then I'm saying in response to this anxiety, right? So the way it's written is not a good option because that talks about the American secretary wanted to avoid going to war. So I'm not referring to any particular anxiety related to the US Postal Service there. So it's not A. But new taxation measures were the immediate catalyst for the outbreak of the American Revolution, with colonists of both affiliations fearing access to their private communications by opponents. And Benjamin Franklin's partner, newspaper publisher William Goddard, was one of its vocal critics. So it's C, right? Because when I say that there was tension between loyalists and revolutionaries, then that tension is brought out in colonists of both affiliations. And then that tension relates to the British-controlled colonial postal service because they feared access to their private communication. And that is the anxiety that the opposite party would access their private communication. The immediate catalyst for the outbreak of the American Revolution, that's not relevant here because we are talking about postal service and anxieties around it. And Benjamin Franklin's partner being a vocal critic is also not a good transition. So C. In response to this anxiety, the Second Continental Congress established an independent mail service in 1775 that, now I need to decide the correct tense, so that provided safeguards, right? The sentence is in the past tense, so I'll simply stick to the past tense. Had provided is past perfect tense, and past perfect tense is only used when there are two events or two actions in the sentence, and I need to demarcate one action before the other, right? So when I say, for example, I had already provided him with the notes when you asked for them, right? So then I'm clearly demarcating that my action of providing him with the notes was done before you asked for them. So there's no such demarcation required here. I'm just talking about an incident in the past, so not past perfect. And certainly present and future tense are wrong because we are referring to an event in the past. The Second Continental Congress established an independent mail service that provided safeguards for confidentiality, such as a provision that mail for delivery be under lock and key. Which choice gives a supporting example that's most relevant to the sentence? Service to and from each of the 13 colonies, delivery 6 days out of the week, the appointment of Benjamin Franklin as the first Postmaster General. So this is no change, right? The way it's written, it is an important aspect of confidentiality that all mail be under lock and key, and that would kind of address the anxiety we spoke about earlier, the fear around opponents reading private communication, right? So A addresses that. Service to and from each of the 13 colonies or delivery 6 days out of the week, or the appointment of Franklin as the Postmaster General, none of those address the first part of this paragraph. When the US Postal Service was founded in 1792, Prohibitions against opening mail without a warrant were written into its charter. Although the Bill of Rights had been ratified in 1791, Desai notes that the legal guarantee of private mail was established independently of the Fourth Amendment. So here I need to decide the punctuation, right? So when I say Desai notes that, then I don't need any punctuation, because when I say he notes that the legal guarantee, then that is a continuous sentence and no punctuation is needed around that. So the way it's written is wrong. The comma after notes is also wrong, because what he noted is included after that. And a colon after that is wrong, because a colon can only come at the end of a complete sentence. So no punctuation, just Desai notes that the legal guarantee of private mail was established independently of the Fourth Amendment. There's no evidence that the amendment was designed to include seal letters sent through the mail among the papers protected from unreasonable searches. US Supreme Court justices, those who eventually held that certain forms of surveillance violated the Fourth Amendment, drew on a tradition of protections derived from colonial experience. So here I need to decide the correct sentence structure. Now I'm talking about US Supreme Court justices who eventually held that. So who eventually gave judgments that said that certain forms of surveillance violated the Fourth Amendment. Those justices drew on a tradition of protections, right? So this part is important to defining the judges, right? I'm not talking about all US judges. I'm talking about judges who eventually gave opinions against forms of surveillance that violated the Fourth Amendment, right? So this part, the eventually holding these opinions, is not additional information. It is essential to defining the judges who held those views, right? So no commas are required. So the answer would be option D. Those who is incorrect because I already have the subject, so this those is wrong. And who is wrong because this who refers to the justices, so this conjunction is wrong. And I definitely need who here because my main sentence is US Supreme Court justices drew on a tradition. So who eventually describes those judges, so who is needed. In the 1878 case, Ex parte Jackson, Justice Stephen Johnson Field crucially extended the meaning of papers in the Fourth Amendment to include sealed papers in the postal system, moreover, making postal policy a constitutional principle. So here I need to decide the correct connector. So I'm saying the justice extended the meaning of papers in the Fourth Amendment to include sealed letters. And so, right? So I need a connector, which means and so. So the best answer would be thus making postal policy a constitutional principle. So it was the actions of Justice Field that made postal policy a constitutional principle. So I like B. Okay, if I say moreover making postal policy, that's not correct because what is said here, that made postal policy a constitutional principle. It was not something additional or separate. So it's not A. Conversely doesn't fit here because conversely is used when you're looking at the other aspect of an argument. So that as a connector doesn't fit at all. And meanwhile would mean that something that happens at the same time. So it is not as good a connector as thus because thus is directly related to cause effect. The other problem with options A, C, and D are these commas after the connector. If I'm saying thus making postal policy a constitutional principle, then that part is dependent on the first half of the sentence, right? So no commas after the connector. And the only option that follows that is option B. This opinion in turn set the precedent for Brandis's equating of private phone calls with sealed letters. Early postal policymakers were instrumental in guaranteeing the right to privacy of correspondence, but new forms of communication in the digital age mean that privacy matters are far from resolved. In grappling with questions surrounding 21st century methods, courts will likely continue to be influenced by decisions made in colonial times. So this is a modifier question. When I say in grappling with questions surrounding 21st century methods, my part after this should begin with the subject of this modifier. So who is grappling with questions? The courts themselves, right? So the part after the comma should start with courts. In grappling with these questions, courts will likely continue to be influenced by decisions made in colonial times. So any option that doesn't start with courts, it is by decisions made, or the influence, that is wrong, because the modifier is always followed by the subject to which the modifier refers. Okay, let's grade this. BDADC, BDADC, and CABDBA. CABDBA. Okay, great. So we got all correct.